Good afternoon, everybody. We are just going to give it a few more seconds to let everybody into the virtual room, as it were. We've got people kind of flooding in as we go. So I'm going to do that kind of slightly awkward Zoom stalling while we just wait for about 30 seconds or so to allow as many people to arrive as possible. But I am really looking forward to this conversation and very much excited to introduce the panel that we have here today. So my name's Jessie Wild, and for those of you that don't know me, I'm one of the directors of the Housing Festival, and we are here for the very first of the series of webinars that come along with the Building Centre and Housing Festival exhibition that's going on in London at the moment. And this particular webinar is called Regions Leading the Way, and we will be having a conversation between Liverpool City Region and the West of England Combined Authority. So as I said, this is the first of a series, and the New Homes, New Ways exhibition is open on Store Street, just off Tottenham Court Road in London until the 21st of February, free to enter. So please do go and have a look if you find yourself in London at any point. Alongside that exhibition, there's a series of webinars and events. So if you're interested in more webinars or more events, please do go and have a look on the Building Centre website or the Housing Festival website. And there you will find all of the kind of the events going on. The one that I really just want to flag to you, though, is that we've got a 2-day summit in February. So it'll be the 12th and the 13th of February next year. So please do mark your calendars and watch this space eagerly for tickets, which are going on sale really very soon. But enough of that. Today we are talking about regions leading the way, and particularly wanting to explore collaborative approaches. And this very much is a live learning exchange between Liverpool City Region and the West of England. And so from the Liverpool City Region, we've got Tracy Gordon, who's the lead officer for housing partnerships for Liverpool City Region. And we also have Rachel Baker, who's the managing director, JJ Smith, and also part of the Future Homes Liverpool initiative. And from West of England, I'm here and I'm wearing my hat working within the West of England, but equally joined wonderfully by Alex Cobb, who's the head of place strategy from the West of England Combined Authority. As we go through, there's bound to be questions that come up. So please, you should see in the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A box. And I would love it if you could put Q&A in there, if you could put your questions in there, and then we'll address those. We're going to go through, we're going to do a very brief presentation from Liverpool and then from the West of England. And we will then address questions after that. Now, if you don't want to put any questions in, that's fine. And what we will do is we will ask each other questions. This is for us to do a live learning exchange, as I said. But if you would like to throw your questions in, I would really appreciate that. Please do pop them in the box. So without further ado, let's get stuck into this. So we're going to start with Liverpool, who are going to give us a little bit of an overview of their city and region and the kind of the context and the lessons that they're learning. And then they'll hand over to myself and Alex to talk a little bit about the West of England. And we will talk about, again, the kind of the context of the West of England and some of the lessons we're learning here. And then we will go into our discussion. So Rachel and Tracy, let me hand over to you to start us off.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. And yes, this is Liverpool City Region. And in case you don't know where we are, we're up in the northwest of England on the beautiful coast, as you saw from the first picture, where we built a temporary house along the waterfront. I would encourage everybody to come and visit. So like many of you on the call, I'm sure we're facing challenging new housing targets where, again, they've almost doubled with the new Labour government. And we're very keen to support that agenda to get the right housing for our residents. We see housing as a key part of our economic growth, where we'd like to develop more skills and our net zero ambitions, as well as the social value we feel we can drive through modern methods of construction, in particular, low bill homes, if not zero bill homes as well. And we feel we're uniquely placed as a key MMC sector with the right leadership, of which Rachel will talk more about later. We've got some excellent partnerships in the city region across particularly our registered providers who are very keen to drive this agenda across the city region and work collaboratively, both together and with our existing companies. And we feel that we're in the right place as a combined authority with lots of convening powers future housing funds to support and drive change through the industry, because I have been here long enough to know that this has been a topic for a while, and we've had several starts. And we need to continue pushing that. Now, unfortunately, David Merowitz, who chairs our Business Enterprise Board, who we've worked really closely with, couldn't be here today, but he has a slide that I'm going to talk through next. If I could have the next slide, please. So why Liverpool City Region? We are a main UK centre for advanced manufacturing. We build ships, we build cars. Why shouldn't we use that expertise to build houses as well? And we have significant leading manufacturers in the area that we can build upon their knowledge and their expertise, with thousands of companies employing tens of thousands of people, and a really great university base as well, with students and with that academic knowledge to support us in our journey to deliver more houses to a better quality, a higher standard, and lower bills, and to the right level that we need to house our residents and our future residents. We are also very privileged to have the Manufacturing Technology Centre based within Liverpool, and the UK's leading digital impact centre at SciTech in Daresbury. So we feel we have the land as well, the brownfield land sites, and an ambition to be net zero carbon for 2035. And all these things are coming together gloriously to make us hopefully leading the way in delivering MMC and the houses that our residents need. And I'd just like to hand over to Rachel to give the next slide. Thanks.
Thanks, Tracy. Yeah, so that was the sort of aligning of the stars, if you like, as to why we took the step earlier this year to launch Future Homes Liverpool City Region. And this is basically everybody from across the supply chain that has all come together. So it's a public and it's the private sector all coming together to really try and solve how we can build homes at scale within the region. So we launched this earlier in 2024. That was actually the picture on this picture here on the slide, in the house and the Ferris wheel. That was the official launch event with Mayata Fanbula and Steve Rotherham and various of us from across the region. And it's great to see some of you, other members are also on the call. I can see you in the attendee list. And across the course of the year, we have held a series of workshops, essentially really looking at what are the stumbling blocks. As Tracy said, MMC is not new. Why hasn't it taken off? Why are we not producing at scale? Why have we got so many people in temporary housing? And through that, we've identified a number of the barriers, which then we've been able to sort of literally come together and, right, well, if that's a problem, how are we going to fix that? Let's really address that quickly and urgently to try and have the scale. So we've done that. We've led visits overseas to see best practice in action in other countries, which I think is really important. This is not an alien concept. This is a concept that other countries are doing and doing well, and we need to be exploring how they're doing it and learning from it. And as Tracy said, we built a house in 3 days outside the exhibition centre in Liverpool, which was there for the Labour Party conference and for the housing festival, not housing festival, housing festival in the brain. That's you, sorry. Anyway, the Housing Community Summit, and I think one of the key barriers that people saw was they didn't understand what MMC was. They had an image in their head of prefab from the 1950s, and then we had thousands and thousands of people through the house that were able to see it and touch it. We joked we should have had a tally on the side of the house for the number of people that came and knocked it. And it sounds really basic to everybody on this call who understands this that these are proper houses, but actually, if you've got people that don't, then I think that's a really important. So it's just exploring some of those things. So those are just some of the things that we have started, and that's where Future Homes has been born out of. Can I have the next slide? So
it's just frozen for a minute, Rachel.
Well, the next few slides are very boring, so I'll just talk. So in terms of images on them, so in terms of other examples of things we've been able to achieve this year, so we have had the first zero energy build house in the north of England built within the region, and that came out of the conversations that we'd had within Future Homes and bringing the right people together. There is also a what will hopefully be the largest zero energy bills development in the whole of Europe that will be hopefully built within the region next year, of which I have to be ridiculously vague because it's in a planning process and I don't want to influence anybody within that system, but you know what it's like. But the principle was that development is about 18 months further along the process than it would have been without bringing all of those people together. So just the simple things of getting all of those people together under the umbrella of Future Homes has managed to speed things up, and to a degree that people said, I didn't think this could even be achieved by what you can achieve in the space of getting people around the table. So what we're trying to say is what can we achieve just by getting people in the right room. And then, sorry, Laura, to put you under pressure again. So I guess the lessons learned from our side is not to underestimate the power of collaboration. I think for a long time there's been this sense of this particular problem is that particular it's either this particular housing officer's problem or it's this particular issue within that. And actually, when you bring people together, the collaborative, we're much better than the sum of our parts is a bit of a cliche, but actually we really achieve it. Don't underestimate how much you can achieve in a really short space of time with the right people. So from nowhere to building a house inside the Labour conference, I think is it wasn't a small feat, and we achieved it because we had all the right people in there. And actually, we were able to have the Secretary of State for Housing discussing things with people from all sorts of different backgrounds and having all sorts of conversations that really drove things forward. So have the right collaborators. And finally from us, this I've stolen this image from Crisis, and I think keeping the focus on why we need homes so urgently has to be central. And I think for those of you who haven't been to the exhibition down in London, there's a really moving display of what temporary accommodation can look like. And I think whenever we're having all of our meetings, this is the reason why we're doing it. It has been the reason that we have all achieved so much, because that's at the centre of it. And I think as long as we all keep that in our minds, I think that will then, speed up the pace of change. So that's a whistle-stop tour into what we have achieved in Liverpool City region over the course of this year. And I think we've come at it from a slightly different perspective from Bristol, and we're really looking to hear the West of England perspective.
Fabulous. Thank you so much to Tracy and Rachel for that. And Alex, it's your and I turn now to talk about the West of England, which is great. So let me start, Alex, with you. If you could start by giving us a bit of a context, like what is the West of England? Who's it made up of? What does it look like? What's the kind of political lay of the land and that kind of thing? And then I'll come in with some of our particular housing challenges, if that's all right.
Yeah, thanks, Jessie. So to answer that, so West of England, broadly the area around Greater Bristol and Bath, up into South Gloucestershire and down into sort of North Somerset as well. I think potentially slightly different to Liverpool, he says naively. We have a initial challenge politically where we're quite multicoloured. So I work for a Labour mayor. Bristol is run by a Green administration. Baines is Lib Dem. South Gloucestershire is a Lib Dem Labour coalition. We've had Conservatives here as well, though not currently. So you've got quite an interesting political challenge, let's say, where people are coming at things differently. Saying that, and Jessie, I'm sure you'll get into it, we've, much like Liverpool and everywhere else in the country, got a real challenge with making sure that we build enough homes. Some of that is a practical challenge, particularly around viability, where it is incredibly difficult to build, in particular in the sort of urban areas of Bristol and Bath, where we ideally like to see homes. It's possibly a little bit easier in greenfield locations, but there's clearly a lot of political challenges with that. We're also potentially in a position where we're what I describe as victims of our own success. So the West of England is incredibly successful at growing as one of the highest GVA areas outside the country, and is seeing significant inward migration, particularly of young people going into, in particular, Bristol and that area to work, live and enjoy the sort of benefits that we have. What that means is we are increasingly actually being constrained by a significant housing crisis and challenges on transport which are linked to it. We've got some of the most congested roads in the country, and actually some really terrifying sort of stats on the housing side. We've got 30,000 people on the region's housing waiting list, 2,000 children in temporary accommodation. And that's difficult, let's say the least. The combined authority is starting to think about how we sort of take action. I can go into that in a little bit of detail, Jessie, but we've got a real challenge statement there of how we can use housing to enable growth, but also deal with all of those fundamental challenges that my colleagues from Liverpool mentioned around just the basic human right of having a safe, warm home, which is a real challenge for us.
Yeah, I think that's right, Alex. And it's worth saying, isn't it, that actually the West of England, we have a housing challenge, but it's not actually unusual compared to the rest of the country, is it? Actually, the whole of the country is facing a housing challenge, but it does play out specifically within the West of England. It's sort of different even across the different authorities, isn't it, within the region? So as you sort of started to touch on, but we've got 4 authorities within the West of England that makes up the combined authority, and they are different. So Bristol, for example, the biggest city, is also an authority in its own right. It's got a large council house waiting list, or just waiting list for social housing. You could argue the biggest challenge for Bristol at the moment is around temporary accommodation from the housing perspective. And that is, as for many people, yes, it's about the people that need that temporary accommodation, but it's also about a financial challenge for Bristol City Council as well, with the escalating numbers that are coming through, that escalating demand for temporary accommodation, but equally, therefore, that escalating cost for the council to have to navigate that and deal with that. If you look across the way a little bit, if you look at Bath as a city, they don't necessarily have the same challenge when it comes to temporary accommodation. Their temporary accommodation need is much less than Bristol, but if you really think about it, their challenge is more around, actually, it's a really expensive city. So in terms of affordability of housing, yes, Bristol has that issue as well. But for Bath, the affordability of housing is causing a challenge, particularly in terms of keeping key workers in the city, or at least close to the city. And therefore, actually, to create a really healthy, functioning city way into the future, there's a challenge there around how do we make sure that people can live in the city to meet all of those key worker roles. There's an argument I think you could probably make, and I think you'd agree, Alex, but feel free to correct me if you don't. But I think there's an argument to make that the challenge across the region, therefore, is social rent housing. And while that might not be, while the different issues across the different authorities are different, actually across the board, across the whole region, if we could increase the number of social rent houses that we have available, actually that could help on all fronts. So it's going to help prevent more people coming into temporary accommodation from a Bristol perspective. It's going to help keep those that really need it in the local area of Bath, and free up some of the other accommodation that's available for those that can afford it. And I think there's a social rent challenge here that's really important. So, but there are some really exciting innovations that are happening across the region. And you look at Bristol City Council, for example, and on the slide that was the cover image for this webinar, you'll see the ZPod scheme. ZPod scheme, known as Hope Rise, is in Bristol. It's housing that has been manufactured. It's been built in over a car park. It's 100% council owned. It's for young people that have been at risk of homelessness. This is council housing that is the ZPod. The Z stands for zero emission deployment. This is really high quality housing that really has very high carbon credentials and sustainability credentials, but equally it's using spaces and sites within the centre of Bristol City that wouldn't have been able to be used for housing. This is a working car park. It's a public open car park. It serves a busy high street, and it serves a busy park as well. And we didn't want to lose that car park in that region, but the housing is on stilts above the car park. The car park has been unaffected. Well, actually, in fact, the car park benefited through that development from electric car charging points and better lines marked out. And so there was actually a couple of extra car parking spaces that were added in the mix of that. So that was completed in 2020. So arguably that's a little bit of an old scheme to be talking about, but it's a really good example of starting to look at, with land constrained, particularly within a local, within the city centres. So how are we going to start to think innovatively? Another one of the projects that is going on at the moment across the region is, again, in Bristol, looking at small sites and how you could aggregate those together, really to look at, if you can aggregate the small sites together, can you make the best of some of the manufacturing technologies that are out there to deliver homes at a more viable scale? And Alex touched upon that viability there as well. But Alex, what about for you, from your perspective, what about kind of particular collaboration or lessons that you've been learning sat within the West of England Combined Authority? What are you seeing that's going on that maybe I'll have missed from my perspective?
Thanks, Jessie. I think completely agree on the social rent need within the West of England across the board, really. It's quite interesting from a West of England perspective, and certainly from a combined authority, we're thinking about it in two ways. Number one, and as we've sort of seen, there are some really, really big, exciting sites that we've got, as I'm sure Liverpool and other parts of the country have, to deliver significant number of homes and really make a step change. So think about Temple Quarter, where we're hoping to deliver 10,000 new homes around the station and working really, really closely with Homes England, the City Council on it. Up in South Gloucestershire on the former Filton Airfield, we're working with YTL there to sort of deliver, again, sort of 6,500 homes, subject to some planning permissions there in particular. But these are some really, really exciting big schemes that will deliver houses over the long term. And what we've really seen through that is the need to collaborate, work across government, and really think about how we deal with big infrastructure challenges, given the sort of viability challenge that I touched on. But the thing with those is these are all absolutely super exciting things, and we should be driving forward with them. They are going to take a long time to deliver, and we've got a crisis now. So the thing that we're really, really exploring in parallel is working out what are those sort of, what I say is smaller scale, quick win interventions that we can do to try and make an impact and deliver social rent housing sooner rather than later, and think about what we can do over 5 years rather than 15 or 20. I think for us, and recognizing that we're quite a new combined authority and very much learning, the skills that we need to think about are how we work with our, in particular, public sector partners, whether they're the councils or sort of fire and rescue or NHS or whatever, and think about how we think about our land differently to optimize that to unlock the things that we want from a public sector and optimal public good perspective, let's say, rather than selling it off to the highest bidder. That is really, really difficult, given in particular the finances of everywhere in the country at the moment. But where, and I can see there's a question going on in the background, where that is really useful, where we can do some clever things to aggregate across landowners effectively, that can help us give the pipeline that hopefully is sufficient to get the supply chain interested and developing. And we know in the West of England particularly, one of the real challenges we have is that, partially because we're slightly more isolated from other big cities than other parts of the country perhaps, we do have a challenge in getting the supply chain to sort of come in and deliver on some of our schemes. So the more we can show there's a credible pipeline of exciting stuff, the more that we can get going and deliver that for our residents.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alex. I'm going to pause us there because we've definitely had our 10 minutes to talk about the West of England, but I will work now to chair the conversation between all of us. So if you do have any questions that you want to put to any of us, please do put them in the chat and I'll kind of try and incorporate them into our conversation. And I've definitely got a lot of questions for Liverpool in terms of to learn more about your approach. We've had a few comments in the chat already from people like Ian, who has said that, well said, Rachel, the crisis and the bigger why is often mentioned, but that impact is rarely discussed. And really that's the focus of the exhibition in London, isn't it? And why you got involved in terms of, actually, we need to make it really clear what's the impact of this crisis at the sharpest end, but also through all of it. And so there are kind of a few different topics that I want to pick up, and I'm as chair's prerogative, I'm going to ask the first question of Liverpool. But I think one of the things I was listening to you talk about in terms of the Future Homes program that you've got getting on, you were talking about the workshops and those conversations and the things that you're learning, and then moving that into impact. You're actually moving that into objective-led delivery, which is really exciting. How do you prevent it from just becoming a talking shop? How do you make sure that this moves into action and it isn't just a lot of people getting to wax lyrical about the crisis or about their product or about whatever, what have you? How do you make sure that it actually moves forward into action?
I think it's really, really important. So I have zero desire to be involved in anything that is a talking shop. I'm just not very good at it. Tracy's laughing. She knows I'm a doer rather than a talker. I think it's probably fair to say. But your motto of being a think and do tank, I think I really like that approach. And I think this space is there has been a lot of chat and not enough action. And I think the reason that sometimes people have got frustrated with the lack of progress, and we've had it discussed in our workshops, is this is all very well, but people have said this for years and nobody's actually done anything. I think the point that Tracy made about the stars aligning, I think, is really key. So I was involved, a few years ago, and I would have a conversation with somebody, and they'd say, yeah, that's all very nice, but it's all a bit, like, yeah, that's in the kind of wouldn't that be lovely camp. Whereas I feel now there's much more of a burning platform problem in terms of finances. And I think so suddenly this has become to the front of everybody's attention. And so just talking about it is no longer an option. And if I get the slightest hint that we're turning into that sort of thing, I will be off. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Tracy.
Yes, it is a shame that David's not here as well, because David absolutely will not allow this to deteriorate into a talking shop. And I think that's why, we've got our first demonstration scheme on the Wirral, 13 houses, but we granted it with some CA funding to have it as a demonstration to start off. And it's about to finish, 6 months, brilliant build, went up really quickly. There'll be some amazing videos looking at that. And then we already have our next site lined up. And what we also have is we are looking at our next scheme as well, where we want to take this model that Rachel has kindly taken quite a lot of our politicians and explained to our mayor about, having small factories near areas of regeneration. So we've got potential investors lined up, working again with our local authorities and our registered providers to come together and make something actually happen, because I think everything we're doing is about driving change, because many of the things that you were saying about the west of England, it's the same here. We've got over 30,000 people on waiting lists wanting social homes. Because we're so affordable, we weren't allowed social rent homes for years, and it's only recently changed, which is great. We have a housing first pilot here in the city region. We've been piloting that approach where you give homeless people a home first and then address the rest of their complex needs whilst they have that stability and a roof over their head. And the hardest thing we're finding is actually finding the properties to put them in, to give them that home in the first place. So we actually have a small waiting list of about 20 or 30 people who are looking for accommodation. And so we're under all the same pressures, and we need to find the same sort of answers. So we're certainly also looking at a small site scheme, and I know both our chief executives have spoken to one another about learning from one another and doing the right thing there. And the other thing that we're also exploring with Rachel and David is prisoners building homes and the skills agenda there, and making sure that prisoners, whilst they're serving their sentence, are learning some skills that will be useful when they come out, that also address the huge skills challenges we're having in the construction sector. So there's a lot of overlap that we can learn from one another, even though we're in different political situations, different availability of land, but exactly, different house prices. But we need to learn from one another regardless of that, because we are facing a lot of the same challenges.
Absolutely. And I think there's it's really encouraging, because I was aware that the two kind of chief executives started conversations between Bristol particularly and Liverpool City. And that is just it's very exciting, isn't it, to see different local authorities actually learning from one another and moving forward. And I think just for those of you that haven't come across the Prisoners Building Homes program, it's a really interesting program of bringing people together that are working with prisoners and MMC manufacturers, and it's worth looking that up if you're on this webinar and you're not aware of that. But let me just do and please do jump in, Rachel and Tracy and Alex, if you've got specific questions, because I'll just keep running through with my questions if not. But I think there's something that I'd like to kind of explore in terms of comparing between the two regions specifically. I know we're looking at, we talked about aggregating small sites, and we talked about MMC, and particularly within the New Homes and New Ways exhibition, MMC, as in modern methods of construction, is kind of a key driver behind delivering of that that strategy, I suppose, is a, for want of a better word. How are you seeing MMC kind of come forward? And there's a particular chat in the question here about how do you get over the understandable reluctance to pay up front for a product, for an MMC home, in an industry where there's been so many high profile failures. So as we're talking about those two different regional approaches to MMC, it'd be great if you could just touch on that question as well. Alex, just to kind of put you on the spot, can I come to you first, particularly to kind of think about actually what are we doing with MMC and small sites?
Yes, I'll see what I say, and you can correct me when I'm wrong, as always, Jessie. I think for our point, as much as anything, we're starting from, as a combined authority, a relatively low baseline where, as Jessie has said, there's a lot of really, really exciting work that's gone on to sort of test the principle and do some sort of small scale pieces of delivery, which are really, really exciting, but we haven't quite worked out how to scale it yet. The piece of work that we're working on at the moment is around trying to, across the sort of 4 UAs, map out what the opportunities are for using small sites to deliver MMC housing, ideally for social rent, in a way that is currently not going before. And so we're doing a big piece of work to sort of map out where all these small sites that are council owned or potentially sort of other public sector owned, that are in many ways just sitting there. They, at least within the west of England, are a bit too difficult and not necessarily viable for market housing or anyone to be interested in doing anything with them. And what we're trying to really get a sense of is, what is that pipeline out there, and get that out of something which is in the sort of back decks of an Excel spreadsheet somewhere into something we can really, really sort of visualize and understand. The exam question, once we've got that, is to try and work out what the opportunities are for aggregation in particular. A load of these sites won't work. That's fine. We can think about doing something else with them, and I'm sure there's a lot of good that can happen. But there is an opportunity, and there will be an opportunity with some of them, can't say how many yet because we're still doing the work, to do something a little bit different and hopefully bring them forward for sort of MMC housing through aggregation. That is going to still be difficult, and is where we are going to need to have some very grown-up conversations with, I guess, both ourselves as funders, but the likes of Homes England, whoever that might be, in terms of access to affordable homes programme, A, and B, thinking about how we work with the planning system that is run by our constituent councils, to make sure that we can work through and potentially get over some of the challenges of needing lots and lots of planning applications for lots and lots of small sites, and that adding costs and sort of slowing everything down. Clearly, we need to respect the planning system and work through it, but trying to think about how we can streamline things through standardization in particular and aggregation. Where we hope to get with that, and it's early days, we don't have the answers yet, is to have a proper worked up pipeline and a funding ask for what we think we can do with these small sites and what the sort of level of social rent housing we can bring forward is. I think to answer the question, I'm not sure who posed it, there is going to be a challenge about paying up front for these, and that ultimately I think this is where the public sector has to take a bit of a risk. We're hoping that through getting enough of a pipeline and building it up that way, there's a clear place for these buildings to effectively go, and you get the supply chain, the pipeline that's needed to deliver via MMC. It's a risk that we're working through, but we are aware that the traditional construction sector is not delivering the homes we need. So we need to really explore the art of the possible to do other things to make a significant difference.
Yeah, I think that's crucial, Alex. It's the comparison, isn't it? That there's been a lot of high profile MMC failures, particularly in the category 1, the volumetric modular, but we've got to recognize that the whole of the construction industry is challenged at the moment, and it's not fair to say that the MMC sector is suffering more than the rest of the construction industry. There have been a lot of companies that are struggling across the wider sector, not just in the MMC space. It just so happens to seem that the MMC failures seem to be making a lot of headline news at the moment, unfortunately, which is not helping when it comes to making an argument for using manufactured construction. So that kind of conversation around actually keeping the dialogue going around the benefits of an industrialized construction approach is really important. Rachel, Tracy, let me give you an opportunity to answer that as well.
Yeah, so from my perspective, we supply machines to this industry. So we see factories that are succeeding all over the world, quietly getting on and doing this. I think there's a few aspects that I want to say. Firstly, as Jessie said, there's been some really high profile traditional construction, but when Carillion or ISG go under, we don't suddenly say, right, that's the end of the traditional construction. Nobody poses that question. So I think that I think we have to take some of these headlines with a pinch of salt, and I also think we need to be realistic and honest about some of the challenges that we have faced. MMC is manufacturing. It is not construction. So we can call it industrialized construction, we can call it whatever we like, but it is running factories. And in order to run factories, you have to have output, and that requires a joined up conversation. So you can run an efficient, profitable factory building 50 homes a year, but you need to have somewhere for those 50 homes a year to go. So if you can have a pipeline for the next 5 years, with those 50 homes a year, you can employ people, you can have stable contracts, you can build up a skills pipeline. If suddenly all of your projects get stuck in a planning system, or there's some issue with something, and suddenly you've got a factory full of workers and nowhere for your panels to go, you've got a problem. And I think we have to have some genuinely honest conversations about that and how we're trying to build things up. So I think there's that aspect to it. And then I think there are also the conversations, as you say, just in terms of traditional construction can't fill all of these gaps, so we have to do something else. So this is no longer a competition between two types of construction. We need both, and we need the skills. And there's no anyone who says, oh, we're going to steal all the jobs from here, this is ridiculous. We need as many people building houses across as many different ways as we can. And I think we have to be honest about that, is my perspective.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think there's an interesting thing there, isn't there, around factory capacity, and that touches on somebody's question here around if we need scale, are we thinking and doing together across regions and across local authorities, not just within smaller regions or local authorities? And I think the answer is yes, we must do that, and there's a lot of initiatives that are trying to do that, but making the move from your kind of standard traditional construction where it's site by site, organization by organization, through to a modern methods of construction way of thinking, which requires aggregation, requires sites going through together, requires a pipeline, requires thinking much broader. It's a massive cultural shift in the way that companies think. Tracy, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, so I mean, I don't want to name them, but one of our housing associations, Register of Providers, has said that by 2028 they will only, obviously where appropriate, they will only be using modern methods of construction, and have already developed their standard housing types to be appropriate for category 2, which is mainly what we've been talking about, MMC, so that they can be built. so that they will then have their pipeline, and they build about 800 homes every year. We're hoping they'll be increasing that across the Northwest. So if you just look at one, of the larger developing associations, they already have that pipeline. They've committed to doing that pipeline using IMC because it will be the high quality standard that they want. And whilst it's a little bit more expensive now, when the future home standard comes in, they'll be getting a high quality home that will be low bills for their residents. It's ticking all those boxes. And we're working, as I said, with a consortium of registered providers to see, the rest of them are looking at this. They're looking at how they could deliver this. They're looking at their own workforce, where they have their own workforce, and getting them trained and working alongside it. Because as Rachel says, and everybody else says, we will need both methods, for a long time. So you can see that that pipeline's evolving. And then whilst our local authorities don't have very much land left, and actually don't have any council houses left either, because they were all transferred out, the areas where they do have land, they are also looking at how MMC could be a delivery of change, particularly in those areas where we still need to regenerate, because we had old housing market renewal areas where the job isn't finished off, it's half finished, and it's where those areas also require jobs and skills and input from that perspective. So joining the two together makes absolute perfect sense, to try and address all the issues that our areas face.
Thanks, Tracy. Time is racing on, and we are due to finish this webinar in only 4 minutes, which is a real shame. I feel like we've only just started this conversation, but I'm going to come to each of you in a moment for your sort of parting shot and your kind of final thoughts of sort of 30 seconds each. Please don't give me more than that, because I won't fit it in. While you're having a few moments to think about that, let me just say thank you so much to each of you for being part of this conversation. And thank you, Rachel, Tracy and Alex. It's been so good to be able to put us all together in a virtual room and have this conversation. Thank you so much as well to the Building Centre, who are doing all the tech work in the background. It's been brilliant to have you kind of there and supporting. This is just a reminder, the first in our series of webinars that goes alongside and hand in hand with the New Homes and New Woes exhibition based in London on Store Street, just off Tottenham Court Road. But these webinars and events are going to be coming up, so do watch out on the Building Centre website or the Housing Festival website for all the dates and the events that are coming up. The next webinar is this time next week. Mark your diaries, this time next week. And we are looking at industrialised retrofit for high quality social rent homes. And we're going to have guest speakers from Studio Partington, Energy Spron and Melius Homes. So please do come along to that. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. But to wrap up, let me get some sort of final thoughts. Rachel, why don't you go first?
Yeah, thank you. I will be super quick. So I think for me, it's about joining all the dots. Somebody asked about skills, and I think that was one of the most exciting moments of the inside the house at the conference that we had, was the moment at which we had the housing secretary saying, this is never going to happen unless I sit down with my counterpart in the DFE and my counterpart in DESNZ, and we come up with a joint strategy together. And for me, that is, if we can get that to happen, so that we've thought about this in the round, and housing is fundamental to all else, but we also, it can be an enabler of so much of regeneration, of skills, of all sorts of things. So I think there is a real opportunity to work together. So any opportunity to collaborate, let's seize it, and let's not keep anything hidden. It's all about working together.
Absolutely. Tracy, did you want to add to that?
Oh, mine's going to be partnership, and Rachel's already really covered that. But yeah, we absolutely need to work across the different sectors to make sure that this is successful. And I always love that, both the Building Centre exhibition and Rachel and all the other speakers have said, we need to remember why we're doing this and the social impact that it has at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And Alex?
Thank you. It's difficult going third. I think the key thing for me is, nationally, there's clearly this ambition for delivering 1.5 million homes this Parliament, 300,000 a year. Without doing something differently, we're not going to be able to do that. And we need to try everything we can to get as close as that as possible. MMC and doing things differently is going to play a significant part of that. It won't be the solution individually, but as Rachel and Tracy have said, building the partnerships, working together is the only way we can get close to meeting the housing need and deliver the key homes that we need for our residents.
Absolutely. And I think my kind of parting shot would be we must learn lessons, so that it's too easy to kind of crack on in our silos and think we're being innovative as one authority or one region or one organization. But actually there's no point doing that if somebody else has already done it all and we're not speaking and we're not learning the lessons. So yes, partnership, but also actually just being humble enough to learn the lessons and learn from somebody else's mistake has to be the way forward, which is why events like this are so encouraging to me, and why hearing of kind of officers at high levels sharing their learning across local authorities is just so encouraging. Well, to end there, thank you so much, everybody, once again for joining us. Please do sign up for the next one next week. But other than that, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I hope it goes well for you. Thank you, everybody.